Welcome everyone to another episode of The Science of Self-Development. On today's episode, we're going to discuss the concept of emotional intelligence and how you can use it in your day-to-day life. My name is Gene Reed, and not only will I be your host today, but I'm also a 15-year police veteran and the founder of Reed Solutions. Now, as a nationally recognized speaker and performance coach, this concept of emotional intelligence is something that I talk about all the time. I actually talk about it so much that I wrote a book about it. Police Leadership Redefined, the EQ Advantage. Now, before we go any further, I have to check in with my buddy Earl Nightingale here and just remind you, especially if this is your first time listening to the show, that I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. That's none of my business. It's nobody else's business. That's your business. All we're going to do today is discuss this concept of emotional intelligence. I'm going to share it with you through a story, because I think that's one of the most effective ways to actually see how emotional intelligence works and what it looks like in a real-life situation. But again, this is totally on you to use this information to your benefit, if you choose to do so. So let's look at this concept of emotional intelligence. So when I first got promoted to sergeant as a police officer, within the first 2 months, one of my younger officers was involved in a vehicle pursuit. Now, looking back on it, vehicle pursuits don't necessarily worry me anymore, but at the time, this was the first vehicle pursuit that I was involved in as a supervisor monitoring it on the radio. Now, as the younger officer is going through his motions and engaging in this vehicle pursuit, he sounds very clear on the radio, and me being a younger supervisor, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. Now, what I'm leaving out of this story is it was pouring rain out. This was a stolen motor vehicle being driven by a group of juveniles. Looking back on that with a little more experience, not the greatest recipe for success. But at the time, again, everything sounded clear on the radio, so I allowed the pursuit to continue. Well, after a short while, things became pretty chaotic on the radio. So me being the responsible supervisor that I was at the time, I very clearly articulated over the airways that I wanted that unit to terminate the pursuit. They had to stop. We weren't going to allow this to continue. Well, that was met by radio silence, which meant either they were ignoring me or they just didn't hear me, which is possible because things do get chaotic. So I reached out to dispatch over the radio and I said to them, please make sure that unit is aware that they are to terminate the pursuit. Well, the very next thing that came over the airway was that of a vehicle collision. You see, the vehicle that was being pursued had crashed into somebody else, possibly resulting in an injury, and all of the occupants of that stolen motor vehicle now fled on foot, and now there was a foot pursuit. So initially I was feeling a little anxious about that situation. Now I was feeling angry. And as I'm driving to the scene, I'm pretty uncertain about what's going to unfold. I've never experienced this as a supervisor. As I show up to the scene, I see there's 6 other members of my team there. A mix of younger officers and older officers. There's also 2 other police jurisdictions there because now this has turned into quite a big deal. As I'm walking up to the scene, I'm making sure to manage my emotions. I'm feeling upset, but I am aware that there's other dynamics, social dynamics going on here, and there's still things that need to get done. Right? There's a potentially injured person in an accident. There are subjects still outstanding in that foot pursuit. There's a lot of different things going on. Well, I made contact with the officer. He's still seated in the driver's seat, and it's pretty apparent that somebody had told him, hey, Sarge told you to shut down the pursuit, because the first words out of his mouth were, I'm sorry. But I cut him off. I said, hey, I'm not worried about that right now. I just want to make sure that you're okay. Well, he continued to try to apologize. I had to reassure him, we're not here to talk about that. Let's fix this situation right now, and then we'll talk about that later. And that's what we did. We handled the situation right then and there in a very cool, calm, and collected manner. But rest assured, we certainly had a counseling session later on that afternoon. But it was away from everybody else. It wasn't in front of everybody. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. And thinking back on it, I wasn't even certain of what emotional intelligence was at the time. I can just now put a name to these different things. But the awareness of the emotions, managing those emotions, being aware of those social dynamics, and having enough respect for the officer to manage that relationship, well, that's emotional intelligence. Those are the 4 key components to emotional intelligence: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. So let's take a little bit of a deeper dive on this. The first pillar of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. Well, what does that mean? Well, think back. When I first heard that pursuit come in, I immediately recognized that I'm feeling anxious, a little bit of anxiety. I've never handled this kind of situation before. And then what happened? What emotion came over me when things kind of went awry? Anger. I was upset. And something that I really want to make sure you all recognize is whatever emotions you're feeling during a certain time in your life, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, emotions aren't wrong. You can feel angry, you can feel sad, you can feel happy, you can feel excited. The caveat is how you respond to those emotions. And that's also something else I want to point out. When you react to emotion, when you feel anger and you react by yelling, that's a reaction. You're allowing that emotion to take hold of you. You're allowing it to dictate how you go about that event, whatever the thing that's happening. When you respond to an emotion, see, responding to something takes time. You have to sit back for a second or two, understand the emotion you're feeling, and understand what's the appropriate response to this. That is a crucial part of self-awareness. The next pillar to this is this concept of self-management. Well, we kind of just talked about, you're going to feel these emotions, and that's okay, right? And they're probably accurate. I think it was very reasonable for me to be angry and upset about that situation that had happened. I tried to do my role as a supervisor, and maybe I could have done it better, maybe I could have been clearer on the radio, but still things did not pan out the way I thought they were going to. So I had to manage those emotions. Now here's what I'll say. Let's say I walked up to that scene and verbally berated that officer in front of everybody. I bet that would have felt pretty good for me. That's what I was feeling at the time. That's actually what I wanted to do. I wanted to get those emotions out. Now, maybe another time that would have been appropriate, but if we really think about that, that's a short-term success. That's a short-term win. Sure, I'm the supervisor. I get to walk up on scene. I get to impose my authority on somebody else, and everybody else gets to see that. That's a short-term victory that has lasting ramifications. Really negative things happen later on down the road. What that does is it creates an environment where people are now afraid to make mistakes. People now worry about every little thing they're going to do around you. And what happens is now your team lacks creativity. Now they don't know really where they can push the line and where they can't, because they know if they mess up that you're going to embarrass them in front of everybody else. Again, I would argue in the situation that I described to you, it's probably not the best way to handle that. So as I'm walking up to that scene, I have to manage those emotions. I'm feeling those emotions, that's okay, but I'm not going to react to them. I'm going to respond in a more appropriate manner. Now let's talk about this. This third component of emotional intelligence is social awareness. I love this. And each of you listening to this, I really want you to start taking note. When you walk into a room, the little different social dynamic things that are happening. There's certain groups of people that are talking to each other. Depending on what your rank is within your organization, if you're even in the private sector, right? If you have some authority or if you don't, right? If you're in a police organization and you hold a staff level rank, understand that when you go have a conversation with a younger group of officers, you have totally changed the social dynamic in there. Right? You've brought yourself, okay, I hate to even say this, down to their level, because we're all people. Just because you have a certain rank doesn't mean you're better or anything like that. But in our paramilitary environment within law enforcement, especially within the military, with their military environment, you know, rank is a very important thing. It's going to be very uncomfortable for a young officer to approach a group of staff members and engage them in a conversation. It's much easier for a staff level officer to approach a younger group of officers. And you will forever change that social dynamic. You will forever make them feel more valued by doing that. And it doesn't just have to be staff level. Even if you have just a lot of time in your organization and you're seen as an informal leader, you can still carry that out with a younger group, right? That's social awareness. And going back to this example, the social awareness came into play when I arrived on scene and I noticed that not only were there 6 other members of my team there, but there's 2 other police jurisdictions. Man, what is that going to look like if I show up and really berate this officer, embarrass them in front of everybody? Again, if I'm not really aware of this stuff, maybe that gives me a sense of satisfaction, right, short term. But long term, now those other police jurisdictions see that, and now this rumor mill gets started about how, this police organization, they berate their people. That was a great learning opportunity that could have happened, and it was really just squandered. You got to be aware of those things. But in order to be socially aware, I also want to make it very clear, these things happen very quickly. These are rapidly evolving situations. You actually have to practice this. This is not something where you're going to listen to today's episode and you're going to be incredibly accurate with your emotional intelligence going forward. It's going to take time. Going back to our old discussion about paradigms, and changing habits takes time. This is going to be a new skill, a new thing you're trying to do. And actually, I'm asking you to do multiple things. I'm asking you to become more self-aware. I'm asking you to manage your emotions a little better. And now I'm asking you to be socially aware. Now, the final component to emotional intelligence is relationship management. I would argue, as a leader, just as a human being, a very large part of your worth comes down to your ability to manage relationships. Your ability to positively influence others, create positive interactions and relationships that last a very long time, that's what this whole thing's about. That's what being a human being is about. That's what being a leader is about. In order to do that, though, you have to really be aware of how you interact with people, how you speak to people. You have to be self-aware, manage your emotions, be aware of social situations. And if you can do those 3 things, from what I have seen, and in my opinion, relationship management just kind of falls into place. Because if you're somebody that's self-aware and can manage your emotions and be socially aware, right, that's really what makes up this concept of relationship management. So when we put it all together, that's what emotional intelligence is. Now I want you to think to yourself, here's your homework. As you go through the next few days or few weeks, start to identify little situations that you come across, whether it's with your kids, a coworker, or even if you're in the car listening to some music or a radio program. Start being aware of your emotions. Start being aware of how maybe you used to react to those emotions, and maybe now how you can respond to them. And start being aware of these little social dynamics that are going on all around you. And then really take hold of how you're managing your relationships, especially if you're in a leadership position. Put yourself out there. Try these things. It's not going to be perfect, I'm telling you that. Similar to the experiment I gave you guys in episode 2, I think it was, about treating every human being as if they're the most important person on earth. It's going to feel awkward. Emotional intelligence feels awkward in the beginning, right? Really honing these skills takes time. It takes time. Well, that's where we're going to end today's episode. Again, read solutionsllc.com. That's where you can get some more content from us. I'm just going to be totally honest, it's kind of funny me recording this episode right now because right before I recorded this, an offer was extended to me from Police One magazine. And you'll see some of the articles that I've written for Police One at readsolutionsllc.com. Well, Police One asked me to do a 10-part video series for them on leadership. Well, what do you think the first video I did was on? What do you think the topic was? Well, of course it was on emotional intelligence. So this episode is, I kind of shortened it up for them, made it about 7 minutes long, but that's how strongly I feel about this concept of emotional intelligence. So strong that, again, I wrote a book on it, and I'll probably write another book. I still think, you want to talk about growth and being self-aware, there's things in that book that I really wish I would have kind of expanded upon and made it a little better, but that's how we grow, right? Again, that's that spotlight effect that we talked about in the last episode. At some point, when you're working on a project, especially writing a book, at some point you got to publish it, right? You can't just be worried and concerned that, oh, this could be a little better. People are going to think this, people are going to think that. Sometimes you got to pull the trigger. So with these video series that are coming out on Police One, I'll keep you guys up to date on that. But that very first video that I have coming out for them is on this concept of emotional intelligence, because I think it lays the foundation for leadership. If you're in a leadership position and you're self-aware, you can manage your emotions, be aware of social dynamics, and manage your relationships. I know I'm asking a lot, but that's what leadership is. That's what the whole thing is. All right, again, thank you for joining me on this episode of The Science of Self-Development. Head on over to readsolutionsllc.com, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.